además de ser el acto inaugural del Congreso, es también el acto inaugural del, como he dicho, el nuevo máster en Mundo, Árabe y Comunidades Musulmanas, Mediación Social y Gestión de Conflictos. Es un máster que se ha iniciado este curso, que es interdisciplinar, interfacultativo, pero que se dirige desde esta facultad, desde la Facultad de Filología y en concreto desde el área de Estudios Árabes e Islámicos. Y bueno, cuando decidimos o pensamos en hacer un acto inaugural o qué tema podría tener el acto inaugural, pues se nos ocurrió rápidamente la cuestión palestina. Esta es la razón por la cual este acto pues, tiene una sinergia con el Congreso que se estaba preparando también paralelamente, y se nos ocurrió la cuestión palestina, pues también, como ha dicho Ignacio, por la centralidad que tiene, no solamente en relación con el mundo árabe y en general con la política contemporánea o con la configuración del mundo contemporáneo, las relaciones internacionales, geopolítica, etc., sino también en relación con las minorías musulmanas o calificadas como musulmanas en Europa y en los países occidentales, ¿no? La cuestión palestina tiene yo creo, un papel bastante central en todos los dispositivos, discursos que gestionan la presencia de estas minorías en Europa, ¿no? Y como ha salido en la prensa una proposición en el parlamentario en el sentido de que se restrinja el acceso a la ciudadanía, el acceso a la residencia a personas procedentes de países de cultura musulmana en relación directamente con la cuestión palestina. Como se ha dicho también desde la mesa, pues creo que desgraciadamente los últimos días nos han dado la razón en todos esos aspectos, es decir, la importancia de la cuestión palestina. Y bueno, sin más, quiero agradecer nuevamente a Avi Shlaim que haya aceptado nuestra invitación. Es un honor abrir las actividades públicas del máster con su presencia, y sin más, doy la palabra a nuestra compañera para que introduzca a
Muchas gracias. On behalf of the Complutense University's new Master in Contemporary Studies on the Arab world and Muslim communities, I'm very honored to be able to present to you this morning our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Avi Shlaim. For those who do not know it, Professor Shlaim was born in Baghdad, but he grew up in, at that time, the new state of Israel, where he was in 1950. He and his family, they were forced into exile to the state of Israel. At the age of 16, Professor Shlaim went to Britain to finalize his high school studies, a Jewish school. He returned to Israel to serve in the army, after which he came back to Britain and started studying history at the University of Cambridge. In 1970, he obtained a master's degree in international relations at the London School of Economics, and in 1980 he completed his PhD at the University of Reading. Now Emeritus Professor of International Relations at the St. Anthony's College of the University of Oxford, Professor Shlaim is considered to belong to the New Historians, which is an Israeli group of scholars who were the first to critically analyze the political documents on the year 1948 that were declassified by Britain and by Israel in 1978. It was the 1982 invasion by Israel of Lebanon that oriented Professor Shlaim towards the history of the Arab-Israel conflict in general and to the 1948 war in particular. Among his many publications, several of his main books are The Iron Wall, which is also, you can also read it in Spanish, Muro de Hierro, Collusion Across the Jordan, which is about King Abdullah, Zionist movement in the partition of Palestine, and Israel and Palestine. In 2017, Professor Shlaim was awarded the British Academy Medal for his lifetime achievement, but we are very lucky that you keep on working, because this year this book has been published, Three Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew, and I fully subscribe to Eugene Rogan's opinion that it's the best book he read all year. Because it's a combination of personal experience, family history of several decades, and also political analysis. Later on I will ask for your signature. But I really recommend reading it to all of you. This morning, the conference is titled Reflections by an Arab Jew on the Arab-Palestinian conflict. Thank you all very much for coming. We are very grateful that you accepted our invitation to come to Madrid. Of course, when we invited you, it wasn't in the current circumstances, but again, it's not new. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a very learningful morning. And after your conference, there will be time for questions and answers, and if we can assist in anything to translate, you can also ask your questions in Spanish if you want, and we can translate it. But thank you very much, Professor Shlaim. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Johanna. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your kind and very scholarly introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. This is a very important event. It's doubly important because it's the Congress of the Inter-University Congress on Palestinian research, and it is also the inauguration of the master's degree in the Arab world and the Muslim communities. In addition, we have guests here from the Gaza Arab, and I'm particularly pleased to welcome the Palestinian ambassador to Madrid. I feel very privileged to be speaking here in Madrid and in Spain because of Spain's glorious Andalusian tradition of Muslim-Jewish harmony, which is the theme of my reflections this morning. The theme is Reflections of an Arab Jew on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The subject of the Congress is 75 years of the Nakba, or 75 years after the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. But when I was invited to give this talk, we had no idea that the Palestinian issue was going to be at the top of the international agenda. We had no idea that the context for this gathering was going to be the horrific events that are unfolding in Gaza. The Nakba wasn't a one-off event in 1948. The Nakba is an ongoing process of the dispossession of the Palestinians. It's a process that is going on ever since 1948, but today we may be on the verge of a second major Nakba. The war in Gaza is horrific. On the 7th of October, Hamas launched an attack inside Israel. This is the worst day in Israel's history. But Israel's response to this terrible attack was even worse than the attack itself. It's out of all proportion. The Israeli attack is not just on Hamas, it's on the people of Gaza, on the civilians of Gaza. And it's an act of revenge and revenge is not a policy. The media focus initially was on the Hamas attack on the 7th of October. But the conflict did not start on the 7th of October. This is a 100-year-old conflict, and the main landmarks in this long conflict are the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when Britain enabled and empowered the systematic Zionist takeover of the whole of Palestine, which continues until today. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the establishment of the State of Israel, and the June 1967 war, when Israel completed the conquest of the whole of mandatory Palestine. Western leaders were very quick to condemn the Hamas attack on Israel and to condemn the attack and to condemn Hamas as terrorists, a bunch of barbaric terrorists. But Hamas is not a simple terrorist organization. It's not a terrorist organization pure and simple. Hamas is a political movement. It's the Islamic resistance movement, and it has got a military wing which does commit terrorist attacks and terrorist atrocities. People forget that in January 2006 there was an all-Palestine elections, and Hamas won a fair and free election to govern the whole of Palestine, both Gaza and the West Bank. But Israel refused to accept the results of the election. Israel denounced the Hamas government. European Union and the United States supported Israel in denying the verdict of the Palestinian people, and they joined Israel in economic warfare, which was designed to bring down the Hamas government. So this is one example, just one example of many, of Western hypocrisy, of saying the West supports democracy. The war in Iraq in 2003 was in the name of promoting democracy. But when the Palestinian people had a democracy under incredibly difficult conditions of military occupation, but they had a democracy, possibly the only democracy in the Arab world, the response of the West was to say, no, we don't recognize the result as legitimate, because the Palestinian people voted for the wrong bunch of people. They voted for Hamas. People focus on the events of the 7th of October. They don't ask, why did Hamas launch this attack? And the answer is, in the context. The context is the Israeli occupation, which has gone on since 1967. This is the most prolonged and brutal military occupation of modern times. This is the real context for the violence that was unleashed by Hamas on that Saturday. The Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal. Everything that has happened in the last 50 years by Israel is illegal. The annexation of Jerusalem in June 1967 is illegal. The settlements are illegal, every one of them. The so-called security barrier, the wall that Israel is building on the West Bank, is illegal. So all of Israel's actions in the Palestinian territories are illegal, unlawful under international law. Israel's attack in Gaza today, in the last week or so, is in breach of every rule of the laws of war and international law and international humanitarian law. What is happening in Gaza today is, and on the West Bank as well, and in East Jerusalem, is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And in Gaza, we are witnessing the beginning of a genocidal campaign. The conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is a political conflict, and there is no military solution to this conflict. Israel only uses force. It doesn't use force as a last resort, but as a first resort. There is an Israeli saying that if force doesn't work, use more force. But this is a completely idiotic idea. If force doesn't work, it's for a reason. It's because force cannot solve political issues. Israeli generals have a phrase that they use about the conflict in Gaza. The phrase is mowing the lawn. This is what would you say in Spanish? Cutting the grass. And this is a horrific image. It means that there is no solution to the problem. Every few years, the Israeli army moves into Gaza with a high-tech technology, with weaponry, and attacks civilians, kills a lot of people, destroys a large number of civilians, destroys the infrastructure, and goes back home. And this is a mechanical thing. It's not a solution. It's a mechanical thing, and it means that the next war is always round the corner. And this is an ongoing system, the ongoing process in which every few years Israel launches an attack on Gaza. One of the most disturbing aspects of the current crisis is the hatred. The hatred is not between Muslims and Jews. The hatred is of between Palestinians and Israelis. After the end of the Cold War, Professor Samuel Huntington of Harvard came forward with the thesis of clash of civilization, which was very popular at the time. But it's a very shallow and superficial thesis. It said that conflict is no longer between states, but between civilizations, between Judeo-Christian civilization on the one hand and Islam on the other hand. The thesis is complete rubbish and has been totally discredited. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a clash of civilization. It's a traditional geopolitical conflict over a piece of land. There are two peoples in one land, and that is what the conflict is about. The roots of this conflict are not cultural or religious, they are political. The Palestinians don't hate Jews, they hate Israelis. And they hate Israelis because of what they've done to them, because of the persistent Israeli denial of freedom and independence to the Palestinian people. And Israel, for its part, dehumanizes the Palestinians, systematically dehumanizes the Palestinians as a people. And this is very dangerous, because when you dehumanize all people, you pave the way, you don't justify, but you pave the way to ethnic cleansing and to genocide. I insist, despite the horrific circumstances of today, that Muslim-Jewish coexistence is possible. The problem is not Islam and it's not Judaism. The problem is Zionism, which is a divisive force and an exclusive force and a racist ideology. This brings me to my book, 3 Worlds, the memoirs of an Arab Jew. It harks back to a different era, when I and my family lived in Baghdad in the late 1940s. It was an era of coexistence and pluralism. My book is an attempt to recapture, to reanimate a rich Jewish civilization of the Near East, which was blown away in the first half of the 20th century by the cold winds of nationalism. For my family and me, Muslim-Jewish coexistence was not an ideal, it was not an abstract notion, it was the everyday reality. It's something that we experience every day, it's something that we touch. And the 3 worlds of the book are Baghdad, where I was born in 1945 and lived up to the age of 5. Ramat Gan, a town near Tel Aviv in Israel, where I went to school from the age of 5 to 15. And London, where I went to a Jewish school from the ages of 15 to 18. So the narrative ends when I was 18, but there is a long epilogue which traces the evolution of my thinking about Israel-Palestine until today, and today my position is support for one state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, one state, one democratic state with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion and ethnicity. The book is not a conventional autobiography. I like to describe it as an impersonal autobiography. The first half is about my family, a family story, set against the wider background of the Jewish community in Iraq, set against the yet wider background of Iraqi history after the First World War. My wife, who is with me here, and who read the book chapter by chapter as I wrote it, said to me one day, "I'm on chapter 5 and I'm very worried because you weren't born yet." And I said to her, this is precisely the point of the book. It's not just an autobiography, it's an attempt, as you said, to interweave the personal with the political. The book revolves around the notion, the pivotal notion of the Arab Jew. We were Arab Jews in Baghdad. We spoke Arabic at home. Our social customs were Arab. Our culture was Arabic culture. Our food was Middle Eastern food, definitely not European food. And my parents' music was a very nice blend of Arabic and Jewish music. And the Jews were very prominent in music in Baghdad in those days. We were Iraqi first and Jewish second. And when I say an Arab Jew, for me the hyphen doesn't divide Arabs from Jews. The hyphen unites. So let me define what I mean by an Arab Jew. For me, an Arab Jew is someone who lived in an Arab country and is Jewish. So there are many Israelis, more than half the population of Israel maybe, who are Mizrahim, who are Jews from the East. But if they were born in Israel, then I wouldn't define them as Arab Jews. But their parents were born anywhere in the Arab world or the Maghreb. If they lived in an Arab country and are Jewish, they are Arab Jews. When we were in Baghdad, there were 135,000 Arab Jews. Today in Iraq, there are three Jews left. That's all. The whole community has been wiped out. The Zionist view is that there is no such a thing as an Arab Jew, that this is a contradiction in terms. This is an ontological impossibility. In Israel, you can say, I'm a French Jew, a Romanian Jew, an Argentinian Jew. You can even say, I'm a German Jew, despite the associations with the Holocaust. But if you say, I'm an Arab Jew, they say, no, that's impossible. My answer to that, it's for me to define my identity, not for them. And there is no better way to describe my initial identity when I lived in Baghdad than that of an Arab Jew or an Iraqi Jew. But I represent a problem for Zionism. And I've had many very favorable reviews of the war, but also attacks by Zionists. I'm a problem for them, because here I am, a living, speaking Arab Jew, which they say doesn't exist. More than that, I'm very proud of my Arab heritage, and I'm equally proud of being a Jew. The Zionist view of the displacement of the Jews from the Arab world is that the driver, the underlying cause, was anti-Semitism. The claim is that anti-Semitism was perennial and endemic and pervasive throughout the Arab world, and it was anti-Semitism that drove the Jews out of the Arab countries to Israel after 1948. I think this is a totally inaccurate description of what actually happened. We in Iraq had deep roots in the country. Jews have been in Iraq for 2.5 millennia, since the Babylonian exile. There were thriving Jewish communities throughout the Muslim world, throughout the Arab world. There were Jewish communities in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, and in the Maghreb. But the Jewish community in Iraq was the most successful, the most prosperous, and the best integrated Jewish community of any Arab country. The 1920s was, the Jews had what was called an Iraqi orientation. The Jews, after the establishment of Iraq, in the aftermath of the First World War, the Jews played a very constructive part in the building of the new state at every level: the economic, the financial, the cultural, the intellectual. The Jews were a very positive element in Iraqi society. King Faisal I of Iraq embraced the Jews. My mother, who died in Ramat Gan 2 years ago, age 96, is the main source and the hero of this story. And she went to the Alliance Israélite Universelle, where they taught them 4 languages, French, English, Arabic, and Hebrew. But the teaching was done in French. That was the medium of teaching. And my mother remembered a visit to her school by King Faisal I, accompanied by the chief rabbi. The Jews were a minority in Iraq, but they were not unique. They were just one minority among many. There were Christians, there were Catholic Chaldeans, there were Assyrians, Yazidis, Turkomans, Circassians, and many others. And there was a long tradition of religious tolerance, of give and take between the minorities. Iran did not have a Jewish problem. Europe had a Jewish problem. In Iraq, in Baghdad, Jews did not live in ghettos. They lived in mixed society. Anti-Semitism is a European malady. From Europe, it was exported to the Arab world. And very interestingly, in Iraq in the 1930s, there was a huge increase of Nazi propaganda, including anti-Semitism. But interestingly, there was no Arabic literature. So anti-Semitic literature had to be translated from European languages to Arabic. And Hitler's Mein Kampf is a good example. The real turning point in Muslim-Jewish relations was the 1948 war in Palestine. The Iraqi army fought in Palestine. At the end of the war, all the Arab neighbors signed armistice agreements with Israel. This was in 1949. These are the only internationally recognized borders that Israel has ever had. These are the only borders that I recognize as legitimate. Everything beyond the 49 armistice lines is the Zionist colonial project beyond the Green Line. After the war for Palestine, there was a backlash against the Jews throughout the Middle East, not only in Iraq, but everywhere. In the 1950s, in the aftermath of the war, there was an exodus of the Jews from the Arab world to Israel. I would say it wasn't a voluntary exodus, but for the most part, and certainly for Iraq, the Jews were uprooted and ended up, many of them reluctantly, in the newly born state of Israel. In Iraq, in 1950, the government passed a law that said any Jew who wants to leave the country is free to do so. They have a year to register. Very few Jews registered to leave. But in the course of the next year, there were 5 bombs that exploded in Jewish premises in Baghdad. And this created panic and fear and accelerated the exodus to Israel. In 1950, there was 135 Jews in Iraq. By the end of 1952, there were only about 10,000 left. The great majority had gone to Israel. The experience of individuals in Israel differed, but for the community as a whole, it was like a tree that is pulled out by the roots. won't say any more about what happened in 1950 in the bombs, but there is a whole chapter in the book with all the evidence that I've been able to find of Israeli involvement through the Zionist underground in the planting of 3 out of the 5 bombs. Zionism is a single-minded and ruthless movement of European Jews for European Jews. Stage 1 was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. Stage 2 is bringing Jews from the 4 corners of the earth to take the place. There is a Zionist view that there was, in 1948, a double exodus, that 750,000 Palestinians became refugees. They left of their own free will, but 850,000 Jews were expelled from the Arab world. So this was a population exchange. I deny this very strongly. The Palestinians were real refugees. They were expelled, whereas we were not refugees. We were not expelled. We were not mistreated. But in a very real sense, we are victims of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Zionist master narrative maintains that the Jews in the Arab world faced another Holocaust, and the newly born state of Israel nobly went to the rescue and offered them a safe haven. This is a very, very misleading narrative. It's an example of the distortion of our history at the service of the Zionist master narrative. There is a view of Jewish history which was summed up as the lachrymose version of Jewish history. What's the Spanish word for lachrymose? Which is tears. Lachrymose. The lachrymose version of Jewish history is Jewish history as a never-ending chain of suffering, persecution, discrimination, hostility, antagonism, culminating in the Holocaust. I am prepared, for argument's sake, to concede that the lachrymose version of Jewish history fitted the history of the Jews of Europe. There is a lot to debate about that. But I reject the claim that the lachrymose version of Jewish history applies to our history, to the history of the Jews in the Arab world. The Zionist movement brought the Jews of the East to Israel to build a European state in the heartland of the Middle East. Israel never wanted to be integrated into the region. The first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, once said, "It's only as a result of a geographical accident that we find us in the Middle East. Our ideology, our values, makes us part of Europe." And Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest-serving Israeli Prime Minister, most certainly doesn't regard himself as part of the region or wants to have anything to do with the region. He wrote a book, a long book, Israel Among the Nations, something like that, about Israel's place in the world. It's a very long book, but there isn't a single reference, a single positive reference to the Arabs, to Muslims, to Arab history or Arab culture. Not a single positive reference. It's an embodiment of Ashkenazi arrogance. And there was last week an editorial in Haaretz, the liberal newspaper, which blamed the attack on Israel, blamed it on Netanyahu and his foreign policy. The predominant Arab view of Israel is that it is illegitimate. It's an outpost of Western imperialism in the heartland of the Middle East. And today, we see the Western leaders jumping to the defense of Israel and to a complete denunciation of Hamas and its actions. So first, Antony Blinken went to visit Israel and the region. He was followed by Joe Biden, and today I think Rishi Sunak has gone to visit Israel to show solidarity. And both Britain and America are opposed to the International Criminal Court's investigation of war crimes in the occupied territories. So they are completely on Israel's side. Another example of Western hypocrisy, of condoning everything that Israel is doing in Gaza, giving Israel a free pass to conduct genocide in Gaza, and not a word of sympathy for the suffering of the Palestinians, or a word of support for Palestinian rights. I'll conclude this part by saying, by quoting Noam Chomsky, the Jewish American intellectual, who said, settler colonialism is the most extreme and vicious form of imperialism. The Palestinians have had the misfortune of being at the receiving end both of Zionist settler colonialism and Western imperialism. I now want to turn to the so-called new history, and as Johanna said, I am a member of a small group of Israeli scholars who were known as the new historians or the revisionist Israeli historians. The other members of the group were Benny Morris, who has since then veered to the extreme right, that's another story, and Ilan Pape. In 1988, we published books. Benny Morris's book was called The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, 1947 to 1949. Ilan Pape's book was called Britain and the Arab-Israeli Conflict, 1948 to 1951. And my book, which was mentioned, is called Collusion Across the Jordan, King Abdallah, the Zionist Movement, and the Partition of Palestine. Between us, we launch a frontal attack on all the myths that have come to surround the birth of Israel and the first Arab-Israeli war. And the publication of the book sparked a major and a heated debate in Israel and elsewhere, and between the old historians and the new historians. And there are 5 major bones of contention in this debate, and I'll go through them very quickly. The first issue was British policy towards the inglorious end of the British mandate in Palestine in 1948. The Zionist version said Britain armed and encouraged its Arab allies to invade Palestine upon expiry of the mandate and strangle the Jewish state at birth. We say no. Britain accepted the inevitable emergence of a Jewish state, but it didn't want a Palestinian state, because in British eyes, the Palestinian state was synonymous with a Mufti state, The Mufti being Haj Amin al-Husseini, the leader of the Palestinian national movement. So Britain colluded with King Abdallah of Jordan, and there is a case against Britain. The case is not that he tried to abort the birth of a Jewish state, but he succeeded in helping Abdallah to abort the birth of a Palestinian state. The second issue is the military balance. The Zionist view is that this was a desperate struggle of the few against the many. We say that in the Palestine arena, in the Palestine theatre, the Jews outnumbered and eventually outgunned all the Arab states and the Palestinian irregulars put together. So the Israeli victory in that war was not a miracle. In this war, as in all wars, the stronger side won. The third issue involves the birth of the Palestinian refugee problem. The Zionist view is that Palestinians left of their own free will or on orders from their leaders and in the expectation of a triumphal return. So Israel is not responsible. And Benny Morris has demonstrated that the Palestinians did not leave, that they were pushed up, and no one can challenge the evidence. And the fourth issue, the third issue, is Arab war aims in this war. Arab war aims in 1948. The Zionist view is that the whole Arab coalition facing Israel was united behind one aim, genocide. And I argue that the Arab coalition in 1948 was one of the most bitterly divided, disorganized and ramshackle coalitions in the history of warfare. And that one member of this coalition, King Abdallah of Transjordan, was in cahoots with the Zionists, because he had a secret deal with the Zionists to divide Palestine, not between Israel and the Palestinians, to divide Palestine between themselves. And this is what happened. The losers in 48 were the Palestinians. 750,000 became refugees, and the name Palestine was wiped off the map, at least for the time being. The winners were Israel, which extended its borders way beyond the UN partition resolution to 78% of mandatory Palestine, and King Abdallah, who conquered and later annexed the West Bank to his kingdom. And the last issue is why did the conflict persist after the guns fell silent in 1949? The Zionist version can be summed up in two words: Arabic intransigence. Our answer is that Israel was more intransigent than the Arabs, and after 1967, Israel was most certainly more intransigent than the Palestinians. Edward Said, who wrote to me one day and said, let's organize a conference at Oxford on the moral and political consequences of 1948. And the result was a book that I saw someone holding. It's called The War for Palestine. The War for Palestine, Rewriting the History of 1948. And the book was co-edited by Eugene Rogan, the director of the Middle East Center at St. Anthony's College, and myself. And Edward Said said that the new history was valuable at three levels. First, it educated Israelis about the Arab view of the conflict and the history of this conflict, as seen by the other side. Second, it encouraged Palestinians, second, it gave Palestinians and Arabs a view of history which was genuine, truthful history, and in line with their own experience in 1948, rather than the usual propaganda of the victims. And thirdly, it created a climate of opinion that was conducive to mutual understanding and to reconciliation, which is what happened during the decade of Oslo. In my book, The Iron Wall, Israel and the Arab World, I extended the critique of Israeli foreign policy from 1948 to whenever I wrote the book, 2000, and then I updated it in 2014. And there are two editions, Spanish editions of this book, one of the first edition and one of the updated edition. I don't want to overrun my time, so I'm going to skip what I was going to say about the basic strategy of the Iron Wall, what it means, and why it failed after the Oslo Accord was signed. But the basic strategy of the Iron Wall is to negotiate with the Arabs in a position of military strength. But that strategy is developed by Israel Jabotinsky at a second stage, which is to negotiate with the Palestinians about a permanent settlement. And Israel has only concentrated on stage one, which is to build Israeli military power and to build a state behind the wall of Israeli military power. With the exception of Yitzhak Rabin and the Oslo Accord, Israel has not moved seriously to the second stage of negotiations with the Palestinians as equals to find a political settlement to this conflict. Israel prides itself on having left Gaza in 2005. The Israeli spokesperson say that by leaving Gaza, they gave the Palestinians an opportunity to turn Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. The truth of the matter is that the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza was unilateral, undertaken purely in Israeli interest. It was not part of an understanding of the Palestinian Authority or a step towards a comprehensive settlement of the conflict. Israel left Gaza in 2005, but it then turned Gaza into an open-air prison, and Israel is still under international law the occupying power because it controls most of the access to Gaza. And after Hamas captured power in Gaza in 2007, because it was denied the results of the election, after Hamas captured power, Israel imposed a blockade of Gaza, which has been in place for 16 years. And it's unlawful because it's a form of collective punishment. So what we are saying now is not something completely new, but it's a total siege of denying the 2.3 civilians in Gaza water and food and medicine and fuel. It's a medieval kind of a siege, a savage siege, and it's genocidal. Israel today is an apartheid state, and in the last 2 years there have been 4 major human rights organizations who issue detailed reports, all of which conclude that Israel is an apartheid state. Where do we go from here? Most of my adult years supported a two-state solution. Not a independent Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza with a capital city in East Jerusalem. I no longer support a two-state solution because Israel has killed the two-state solution with its settlements, with all its policies. So what we have between the river and the sea is one regime, an apartheid regime, and this is unacceptable to me. That's why today I advocate one democratic state from the river to the sea with equal rights for all its citizens. And my own history, as detailed here, my own experience of living among Arabs, helps me to think of a better future for our region. Muslim-Jewish relations and harmony existed in the past, and there is no reason why it cannot happen again in the future. So these are the reflections of an Arab Jew on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you for listening.